Hey, it's Rob. One of the things that eventually happens in a YouTuber's career is that eventually you'll run across an individual or group of individuals who share a common interest or common goals, and you end up doing a collaboration with them. I ran across these two individuals who run a podcast called God and Government. It's conservative principles from the Christian perspective. They invited me to be on their show. I had a blast with both of them, so I figured I'd share the show with you. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. This is the God and Government podcast. I am your host, John Steinrich. Welcome to the Free Speech Zone. We're very excited to be back and bringing you new content. Very exciting episode today. And on the line with me is my wingman, Marc Richardson. How are you, Marc?
Hello, fellow humans. John.
Marc, you, I must say, to tell our audience, I'm a little bit crestfallen because I haven't escaped. You escaped not that long ago, didn't you? You escaped from tyranny.
Hey, just call me Snake Plissken, man. I broke free.
You escaped from L.A. That's right. So yeah, I'm here in the People's Republic of California, and you are in the free state of North Carolina.
That is correct. I'm in the mountains of Western North Carolina,
Wow.
Enjoying myself.
Well, I bet that is it's just a little different than what you experienced in California. Can you give a brief overview of your time there? What you've experienced?
You know, it's I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, freedom is great. I mean, you know, the thing about North Carolina is a bit of a purple state.
Uh-huh.
But the crazy thing about it is people are allowed to express their opinions and not be canceled and not be threatened. And,
yeah,
you know, it almost reminds me of, I don't know, that place we used to call America.
Wow. That would be refreshing because, you know, living in a blue state, blue city, we've sort of come into a time when the whole cancel culture is a problem, where speaking your mind, you know, is a dangerous thing. And so I commend you for making that step to go out there. And I'm glad, I'm happy for you. And I think, you know, as we go along, we are able to use your experience to contrast what it's like to live in sort of a free place as opposed to a more dictatorial, progressive kind of place. But anyway, this episode, I'm calling You Ain't Black. And some people might find that provocative, but you know, I didn't invent that term. It was actually, if you remember, during the 2020 campaign, when Charlemagne the God interviewed then candidate Joe Biden about basically his policy towards Black Americans, and he made a comment. I think he was trying to be kind of comical by saying, well, if you don't support me, you ain't black. He was talking to Black Americans using sort of that vernacular. And when I heard that, boy, it rubbed me like, that's rather crass. I'm like, geez. But at the same time, I understood why he was going there. He was, you know, basically saying, hey, you know what? Most Black Americans are going to support me. And if you don't, then, well, you know, you're not part of the team. Now, since you are Black, the last time I checked, Marc, what did you make of that comment when Joe Biden said that?
Well, let me just put in first. It's like there's good news, John. It's like my Black card did come in the mail, so I did pass my exam, and I am recognized as Black.
Okay. All right.
So how did I take it? Well, the Democrats tend to pander a tremendous amount to various other races and groups, and I believe that they know that their hold on Black America in terms of voting, while still strong, was starting to crumble, especially underneath the Trump campaign, because you know, Trump, crazy enough, treated us like human beings, you know, capable of making our own minds up in decisions.
Yeah.
And of course, Biden went back to the age-old monolithic thinking that, you know, how dare you think outside of the box? Obviously, you're not part of the team because, you know, you dare to disagree with the true racists, the Democratic Party.
Wow. Yeah, that you know, I find it really challenging, like that, you know, these kind of blanket statements sort of devalue individual thinking, regardless of what ethnic group you are. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with a person being proud of their heritage, or being part of a community from which you come ethnically, that's perfectly fine. But to really discount the individual's thinking, and to say, you know what, you're not actually the real thing. You're not a real Jew. You're not a real black person. You're not a real Asian, or whatever it is, because you don't support a certain philosophy. That to me is, I think it's offensive, and that's really an anti-American attitude, because our ideas are really individualistic, really, that every individual, and it's Christian as well. Don't you think that every individual has his or her own conscience before God to decide what to believe? What do you think?
I agree with that 100%. And what your question and your statement actually brings up is a deeper problem within, quote unquote, the black culture, in which we denigrate our own. It's like if you don't subscribe to certain, I guess say classic genres of quote unquote being black, then blacks ourselves, accuse us of being, sellouts, Uncle Toms.
Right.
Gosh, I was called an Oreo at one point in time during my younger years because of my dating habits. And I'm sitting there going, well, if the outside is looking at us like this and the inside is looking at me like this, then where exactly is the chance for unity and growth as a culture?
Good question. That's a really good question. Well, we're going to talk about all this in depth with our guest, and you and I have been always on the hunt and looking for Black Americans who are individual thinkers.
I know, the unicorn.
Yeah, yes, we're really looking for that, and I'm really blessed to have come across a gentleman who fits that bill, and I think he's going to really elevate our discussion today. So let me give a little bit of background and then welcome him. So Rob Lett is a real estate professional. He's a brand ambassador and a political commentator. He's the host of the Rob Lett channel on YouTube, where he posts his video commentaries on political, historical, and economic issues. And most importantly, he is a husband and a father. And so on the line with us as well, please welcome our guest, Mr. Rob Lett. Rob, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. How are you, John?
I'm all right. Well, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I wanted to just start off here. I watched some of your videos. You're very astute and articulate. You got a great command of the facts, and I find that to be very impressive. But as a Black American who happens to espouse and really openly espouse conservative values, that's got to be a challenge for you. And I wanted you to maybe give us a little bit of background as to how did you arrive sort of at your conservative, ideological viewpoint.
Well, thinking back, I'm originally from New York, and my parents are in real estate. So as a kid, I always wanted to get into real estate investing, and I eventually bought and managed a nice portfolio of properties. And before I knew it, I ended up being a business owner. And I think it was owning this business that gave me the first clue that I was a little bit different from my friends, because at one point I had to evict a tenant, and one of my friends was having an issue with the fact that I had to evict them. And so I kind of made a joke. I said, well, if you feel that strongly about it, and I said, I'll tell you what, you can pay me what the tenant owes me. I'll pay my mortgage, and we can save the world together. I'll provide housing, you provide the financing. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that joke too much, but but it showed me that there are a group of people out there whose favorite pastime is virtue signaling, where they are passionate about saying how much they care, but they're not really equipped to do anything about the situation. And I felt, at least as a conservative, at least I was providing housing for society. At the very least, I should be allowed to mitigate my risks by performing an eviction. Meanwhile, the leftists stood on the side, comfortably throwing rocks at me.
Wow.
But I still didn't understand that meant I was a conservative. That's just something that helped identify that there was a little bit of difference between us, even though we grew up together. So at first I thought it was just due to the fact that we both had different business experience. But as I traveled extensively and learned, I ran several businesses. Over time, I started realizing that we disagreed on things that were much more than business. And so that's when I started delving into what those differences actually were and where it came from.
Wow. Well, the real world sounds like it hit you straight up in the face, and that you recognized that there was a challenge. And Marc, you and I have talked about your story. I mean, does that resonate with you as well, the way you described it?
It does, and it was funny when you was like Rob, when you mentioned like real estate. The first thing that popped in my head: did you ever have any connections or interactions with that evil racist Donald Trump, since he was very much involved in real estate in the New York area?
I didn't have any interactions with him, but I remember as a kid reading, looking up to him and reading some of his books. It was Art of the Deal back then. So I actually looked up to him because he even though he wasn't a politician, he was very vocal about our mayor at the time.
Yeah.
And so everyone looked up to Trump as the person who was getting things done, regardless of the fact that it was the mayor's job.
Was that David Dinkins, the mayor at the time?
No, I believe it was Ed Koch.
Ed Koch, yeah, okay. So yeah, Ed Koch was sort of a traditional, old school Democrat, so largely progressive, but not out of his mind, as I remember him.
Yeah, and right, he was very much into classic New York politics, unions and mainly infrastructure, but it's like, but he was a realist in terms of trying to get business done and moving. He hadn't gone into the virtual signaling rabbit hole at the time.
Yeah. Wow. So let's dive right into this. I got some topics for us, and on the God and Government podcast, we like to bring scripture in and sort of use that as a starting point for our discussion and see how it relates to what's going on. So, there's a passage in the New Testament, Rob. It's 1 Timothy 4:16, and in the New International Version translation, it says, "Watch your life and doctrine closely, persevere in them, because if you do, you'll save both yourself and your hearers." So when I read that and Marc reads that, our conviction is that basically you got to look at the way you speak. You talked about this virtue signaling versus how you actually live, right? Watch your life and your doctrine, what you teach, what you preach, and what you actually do. You've got to have both of those in line. Now, I would say that when I read the Bible, I come away with a rather conservative outlook. And by that, I mean, when I read through the scripture, I get the idea that, the Bible seems to support individual liberty. It supports small government. Wherever you see big governments like Egypt or Rome, there's nothing but tyranny, right? The Bible supports the sanctity of life. It supports traditional marriage. It supports entrepreneurship and things like that. So these are all biblical values. Now, I did a little bit of research in advance of this, and I went to the Pew Research site, and a poll that they conducted showed that about 80% of Black Americans are affiliated with the Christian faith. So, one would think that, okay, you got 80% of a certain population that is Christian. You'd think they'd be running head over heels to support conservative values, because conservative values tend to align with the Bible. And yet we know the reality is that at this time, 80 to 90% of Black voters support the Democratic Party, which tends to have a liberal progressive and a post-biblical or in some cases anti-biblical view on things like marriage and abortion and school choice and so forth. So as a Black conservative, Rob, what is your perspective on why Black Americans are affiliated with Christianity? They may be conservative in their religious beliefs, but they're really liberal in their voting habits.
Well, that's an excellent question, John. I thought about this and I really gave it some thought, and I said, well, really, that phrase conservative really comes from the fact that we believe in conserving the original principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from the founding fathers. So whenever you talk of conserving things, that's pretty much synonymous with tradition, because religion falls in the same vein as conservatism, in the sense that religion is a set of principles passed down that our family expects us to conserve. Right. So we're quite familiar with conservative principles in the religious regard. One of the things that's important, but it's a subtle principle of God that escapes most of us, however, is God's mercy. And God could force us to believe, but instead he grants us the individual choice to believe in him or not, right? And to me, this subtlety is extremely important because I think it's what attracts blacks to the Democrat Party. Because the Democrat Party has mastered what it sounds like to be Christian, to sound Christian without the essence of Christianity, which is it minuses God's mercy. So policies like welfare, policies like affirmative action, policies like minimum wage, which all sound very Christian-like because they're helping their fellow man. But what blacks miss out on is the fact that government has no mercy. Government only knows force.
That's correct.
That's not God. That's tyranny.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what attracts blacks to the Democrat Party, because they're really great at masking or imitating what sounds like benevolence. But if you don't understand the subtle difference in between what makes, to what makes God God, is the fact that he's got the power to enforce any of that, but he doesn't. He still believes in individuality at the core.
Yeah.
And that's not what government is.
Well, I would agree. Mark and I have had extensive talks about that, that there is a dividing line between the role of, let's say, the family and the church, which is sort of the mercy and the benevolence, and government, which is a hammer. It's the instrument that God set up to enforce, punishment on evildoers, basically. And so I've kind of thought that when you crisscross these roles, like if the government gets into benevolence, it doesn't do it well. And if the church goes into like law enforcement, it won't do that well. You end up with the Spanish Inquisition. Mark, you have any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I do. It's funny. So Rob, I was just, listen when we were talking about the life and doctrine. So I was curious and looked up, like the definition of doctrine, which is a principle or body of principles presented for acceptance or belief as by a religious, political, scientific, or philosophical group, or a dogma. So I was just wondering, when you were growing up, were you in your family structure with the parents, were you raised with the conservative, or conservative, or the power, the ability to conserve, and did you maintain that through your teen years and early 20s, or had you strayed away from it and then had a red pill moment, so to speak, where you realized you just kind of veered a little bit off course, and your course correction brought you back?
I think it's the latter, what you just said. I think I veered off course because I didn't really know concretely what conservatism meant. And so I think my conservatism brought me back. I remember distinctly when I graduated from high school. I even remember exactly where I was sitting in my house when I lived in New York. I remember distinctly when I graduated from high school that I sat there and realized the gravity of the fact that I was about to be on my own set in. And I said, wow. I said, I'm graduating from high school. And I said, so now I'm my own person. I don't have to have all the same beliefs as my parents, et cetera. And I went immediately to politics for some reason in my mind. And I remember thinking, what am I? Am I a Republican or a Democrat? And back then, this isn't true, but back then, at least the narrative was that the Republicans were for people who had money. If you wanted to, you wanted to save on your taxes or whatever it is, or if you wanted to be wealthy, that's where you belong. But if you were all about just the little guy and raising taxes and all that kind of stuff, or government programs, then you must have been Democrat. And I remember asking myself, whose team was I on? And I remember distinctly having my conversation in my mind that politicians actually have got the public fooled, because Democrats try to pretend that they're not rich. And they try to pretend that they want to raise taxes on the rich. But someone's got to be smart enough to know that those politicians aren't going to raise taxes on themselves. They will always leave a loophole for themselves. And so at the end of the day, do you want to be on the winning team or the losing team? And I remember distinctly saying, I'm going to be on the winning team. So that means I'm going to be on Republicans, because at least they're honest about it. But I just didn't know what that meant.
Wow. Yeah, I kind of had a moment like that. I remember sometime after 9/11, I had this sort of epiphany, and I said, oh God, I'm a Republican. I think I'm a Republican. Because I'm of Jewish origin. I grew up in New Jersey, so we're neighbors, Rob, and the New York metropolitan area is pretty blue and traditionally Democrat. Sort of when I grew up, it would have been the John Kennedy kind of Democrat, with the idea, like, yeah, for the little guy, that the government is this instrument of good and we can do all of this stuff. And wouldn't it be nice? We ought to have a law that's going to fix all the problems. And there came a time in my adult life when I'm like, gosh, you know what? All this do-gooderism, like, it's not actually doing all that much good. And the other guys, they may be country club and boring and have no personality, and maybe they don't really care about the little guy, but at least they're not trying to rob every dime out of my pocket to go off and do some wild goose chase scheme that doesn't work to fix problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Marc. Yeah, and for myself too, like I was born and raised in Detroit, so predominantly black city, predominantly black predominantly black mayor, predominantly black city council. And as I grew up, I began to start asking myself just simple questions. Like, one, well, why aren't things getting done here? Why is the infrastructure starting to collapse? Why aren't we not investing more in not even programs, but just infrastructure within a city to help make things easier? And I still, to this day, Detroit has one of the worst public transit systems in the country. So it makes it incredibly hard for people who don't have a vehicle to get around and to get out to the centers where the jobs are. And every time I would ask my friends who are still, they're still diehard, dyed-in-the-wool liberals, all I kept hearing was blame shifting. It was never the mayor's fault. It was never the city council's fault. It was always basically the rich whites out in the suburbs who were keeping us down. And as I grew older, I just started to kind of shift out of that victim mentality and go, well, maybe it's your fault.
Wow. Yeah, this is great stuff, guys. Let me move on here. I got another passage here, another verse of scripture. And this has to do with the idea of me or we. That's what I put in quotes here. And like we were talking about earlier, so much of sort of the conservative value or the conservative principle, and I think biblical principle, it has to do with the value of an individual person. There's, you'll hear some politicians, preachers, whatever, talk about collective salvation. I've heard that term, but I don't see that anywhere in scripture. It's all about individual salvation, my relationship personally with God, your relationship with God. And there's a famous verse in the New Testament. It's Matthew 18:12, and it's Jesus who's talking. He asked this question: what do you think if a man has 100 sheep and then one of them goes astray? Does not he leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? So right here, Jesus is giving an analogy of the importance of a shepherd. He's got the whole flock. 99 are cool, but that one is lost, and he is going out to find that one. He's very concerned about the individual who's gone astray. And I'm sure that Jesus is making analogy that implies that God really cares about individual human beings, individual souls. And as I see conservative ideology, it echoes this worldview that individuals are actually the most important of all human entities. While society is great, of course, we are gregarious beings. Communities are great. They help support the individual, but ultimately, each individual person is immeasurably valuable, and each individual person is unique with their own intellect, their talents, interests, and so on, right? Now, when we go to the media, and the media, in my view, discounts individuality, particularly among Black Americans. And basically, the media will communicate, if you don't share the liberal progressive view as a Black person, then somehow you're anathema, right? And then if a Black American expresses a conservative political viewpoint, they become a persona non grata. Some of the most vicious name calling comes towards Black conservatives. So this is my question, Rob. Why is that? Why do you think there's so much vitriol against Black conservatives? And why is collectivist political ideology, why does that have such a strong influence on the political leanings of Black Americans?
That's a great question, John. I think whenever you go through something traumatic, it bonds you in a sense.
Okay.
So slavery was an event that blacks experienced as a race, and so for a long time, we was all we seem to have.
Mm-hmm.
So what gets neglected in the conversation, though, is the fact that all of the United States wasn't engaged in slavery.
Mm-hmm.
What gets neglected is the fact that all white people weren't engaged in slavery. What
Yeah.
gets neglected is that Republicans fought Democrats to abolish slavery.
Yeah.
So if you happen to be a black person who brings up this fact, you're considered a sellout or whatever the chosen derogatory term is of the day. Never mind the fact that all of this is a fact. So the argument ends up being one of fact versus emotion. While there's certainly times when it makes sense for people to come together and accomplish something, believing that you are less than the community is just unhealthy, though. So this is actually a phrase where this is where the phrase communist really derives from, adhering to one of the principles of the commune or community. So that's what you hear pretty commonly among blacks is the black community.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of side effects to the communist mindset. In fact, I've come up with a name for one of them. I when you and I were talking before, I call it the MC Hammer principle.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone familiar with rap music knows MC Hammer was right. I told people, I said, anybody familiar with rap music knows MC Hammer was one of the first rappers to actually have commercial endorsements. He was one of the first rappers to be on Oprah. Hammer was widely popular. At his height, he was worth about $33 million.
Wow.
But as Hammer, as his popularity started to skyrocket, just as quickly he filed for bankruptcy. And the reasons why is because he was infected, in my opinion, with this communist thinking. Because when you have money in the black community, the pressure is on you to do something for the community, right? It never mind you, it's about the community. And so if you look on YouTube today, for those who maybe Hammer is, after their time, if you look on YouTube today, you'll see evidence of Hammer with more than 30 people in his band. That's 30 people on the bus. That's 30 people that have to eat. 30 people who need costumes. You get the gist.
Yeah.
Hammer had so many people on the payroll that eventually drove him into bankruptcy unnecessarily. And this isn't unique just to MC Hammer. I was watching another YouTube video and I found out recently that Jay-Z suffered or wrestled with the same affliction, but fortunately he was, had some people around him who thought differently. On Jay-Z's first album, there was this dude, they were setting him up to be the next Jay-Z. It was a rapper named Memphis Bleek. And Memphis Bleek admitted that Jay-Z said he was struggling. When he became a billionaire, he was kind of struggling with the fact that he felt like he owed everyone something now that he was a billionaire. But I loved Memphis Bleek's response. He said, listen, dude, he says, you don't owe us anything. You gave us all an opportunity, and that's all you can do. Don't feel guilty because you ran with an opportunity and we didn't. An opportunity is better than a paycheck. If you give someone a paycheck and they spend it, it's a wrap. They're done. But some of us are still eating today because of the opportunity that you gave us. And I said, now there's a brother who gets it.
Wow. That is really profound. Yeah, well, we were talking the other day about the idea that the sense of community has morphed into something that's in some respects, it's not healthy for individuals among Black Americans. I think that's really profound because I look, when we do look back at the slave experience and the segregation experience, these are horrible phenomena. And for self-preservation, Black Americans did need to band together to protect themselves. But as time has gone along, and thank God we've come at least this far in bringing about freedom and prosperity to many Black Americans at this point, for some sort of obligation to be owed by individual Black Americans to prosper and then turn around and automatically give just out of some sort of ethnic solidarity does fly in the face of the whole American construct of individual freedom. Marc, what are your thoughts in this regard?
Ooh, boy, I got a few of them, but I was like, I'll try to keep them concise. I mean, Rob, you bring up a great point. This is something I'm sure everybody's heard about. Is especially from the Black experience, the lobster in the barrel moment. Just like we were saying, if you tie in Jay-Z with the fact that someone becomes successful, And of course, the thing that I always find hilarious is this difference between somebody who's sold out and somebody who's quote unquote real. And you kind of look back and you say, okay, so let's see here. So if he or she became successful and they're in a depressed area of a city, so the first thing you usually do is when you have more money is you explore your options. It's like, well, I like to live in this neighborhood. It's safer. It's like, I like the community. I like the commute. And then that person, maybe because they are quote unquote with the system, everybody goes, best of luck to you. Fantastic. However, somebody who may not be quote unquote part of the crowd, if they move out of the neighborhood, all of a sudden then they're quote unquote, a sellout. Oh man, it's like, oh, you're leaving. But wait a minute. And you kind of like there's a disconnect in many people's minds on that. As if you would think that, let's see, if Jay-Z grew up in a rough and tumble area of St. Louis, yeah, I'm gonna build myself a mansion right here in this area. And and you sit back and go, well, nobody in their right mind would do that. If you became successful, the first thing you're going to do is relocate. Because you grew up in an area where guns were being drawn, gang warfare, and you sit back and you wonder, like, so why would you call him a sellout or he or she when you would do the exact same thing? And it's this problem that I see come time and time again, in which, like Robert, you were describing, like during the period of slavery. Yes, we all kind of bonded together because we're trying to keep ourselves alive, and we're also trying to say, okay, we need to work together and unify. But it seems to me that whole idea went out the window as soon as we quote unquote defined slavery was over, and then it became every person for themselves. But yet that same type of independence isn't promoted. It's, well, every person for themselves, but we all have to stay together. I don't get it. I'm a head scratcher.
What do you think, Rob?
I'm in agreement with that. I mean, that's what everyone is so conflicted about. It's like we're independent. Even when you listen to some of these rap songs, it's like we're independent when they're selling records or whatever it is. I mean, I could go through so many Jay-Z lyrics or rap lyrics in general, where it's just like, hey, I got mine, you get yours. And then when it comes time to vote, it's like, hey, all of y'all don't matter. If one of us fall, all of us fall. But then when you make a record, it's like, I ain't got nothing to do with you. I don't have none. Your success don't have anything to do with my success. I'm like, which one is it?
Yeah. There's a famous quote. You were talking about the rapper that was working with Jay-Z, who said, hey, all I needed was an opportunity. I think that's a really critical idea for people to gather. It's like, the idea of having an opportunity as opposed to a guaranteed outcome, that does separate us in sort of conservative thinking. And I think traditionally, at least, going back a while in history, that was the part of the reason, for that motivated Black Americans, obviously, to come up out of slavery, out of segregation, all that stuff, to prosper. Is like, I just want an opportunity, get out of my way. I want to read you something. One of my favorite figures in American history is Frederick Douglass. And, at the end of the Civil War, he was asked the question, okay, what do we do with the Black man? And his answer was, he says this: do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us. And then he goes on, he says, all I ask, give him a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone. So here's a man who lived in slavery, who had no formal education, just, bootstrapped it his way up, all the way to the point of advising Abraham Lincoln. And when he's asked, by, I guess, the do-gooders of his day, hey, what should we do with all these, poor freed slaves? He's like, nothing. Get out of the way. Just get the heck out of the way. And somehow that's gotten, I don't know how that's gotten twisted, but maybe Rob.
No, I mean, all of this going back to the Marxist roots of the Democrat Party. I mean, their whole principle of Marxism is to overthrow government. I mean, their whole principle is to overthrow government, especially in this case, because conservatism is all about freedom. It's all about, minimizing the size of government. It's about appreciating life, etc. So their whole idea is to overthrow all of that in capitalism. And so that's the reason why we've gotten away from any of that. Because anytime we're doing anything that flies in the face of high taxes or more government intervention, their goal is to upset it through the media, through Hollywood, etc. So none of that stuff is accidental. I was just talking about this the other day where I think Star Trek has Stacey Abrams appearing on Star Trek show. I've seen her in a number of Netflix specials, a number of television shows. Keep in mind, she hasn't won any election anywhere. She's not an actress. So why is it that they're constantly trying to force this person, into the media's eyes? Because that's the thing. Nothing is happening accidental.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's one of the things, when we think of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I've been struck by the fact that, of course, Black Lives Matter. That's self-evident. Human beings matter, and I don't like police brutality. I don't think anybody in their right mind would like to see an innocent person of whatever color being harassed and mistreated by law enforcement. But what I've struggled with in wrestling with people over the idea of the Black Lives Matter movement is that the underpinnings of the actual organization, not the phrase itself, but the organization, is motivated not by benevolence towards Black people who might be suffering, but by Marxism. Mm-hmm. So that, and Marc and I, we're anti-Marxist. Wouldn't you say, Marc?
Comrade.
Yeah.
But John, you bring up a really good point, and I was like chomping at the bit when I heard Rob speak here, because Wendy and I, when we were driving, we listened to Red Pill America, and they're doing a long special right now and their title is called The Woke Army. And Rob, they hit right on the button what you were describing in terms of, it's like during the, this is like even back right after between World War I and World War II, where you had the socialists who were attempting to basically, they said, well, if we give people and we show them how being oppressed underneath a capitalist regime will press upon them, they will eventually turn communist. And then especially in Germany, they realized, or they saw for themselves, people tended to embrace capitalism, and they couldn't figure out why. But then basically over time, they basically started infiltrating culture changes or culture changers, which is education, which is entertainment, especially TV, radio, movies, books, poetry, art. And unfortunately, a lot of conservatives and then Republicans abandoned those. Yeah. And now you have what you were describing, Rob, Stacey Abrams. Like, how is Stacey Abrams on Star Trek? And then worse yet, an LGBTQ Kirk. And you're just scratching your head going, okay, Paramount, so you're virtue signaling on an epic scale, but yet your stock has tanked. It's like, I think it's down almost 42% in the past 6 months, because people are looking at this agenda and they're saying, it's like, well, all of this completely flies in the face of Gene Roddenberry's initial vision of Star Trek, which he wasn't hammering people over the head with, equality. He allowed the story to tell itself. And you shake your head going, okay. And then just a quick point on the BLM movement. So we were sitting here. So one of the Black Lives Matter leaders gets indicted on 18 counts of fraud.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. and then you sit back and you ask yourself, okay, you support Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. But the question is, so Black Lives Matter had received millions, tens of millions, of hundreds of millions of dollars. Has anybody seen any community center built in depressed neighborhoods? Has anybody seen any invitation to maybe it's like minority run businesses to come into these neighborhoods to offer jobs to anybody? Has anybody seen any parks being built in the Black Lives Matter name? Has anybody seen any resolution in terms of gang conflicts? All I see is a grift.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I did a story, Mark. I did a story on, I don't know if you remember this, but outside of Louisiana, in the Southwood High School for about 3 weeks straight. They had a bunch of fights that were going on, and a bunch of students were arrested. And eventually what happened was a group of dads just started coming down to the high school in shifts. And it was an organization called Dads on Duty. And all of a sudden, all of the activity, all of these fighting, all that stuff stopped. They didn't need any government intervention. Wow. They didn't need any police to come down. There was nothing. It was just people in the local community who stepped up. And one of the questions I asked in my show is I said, tell me where Black Lives Matter was in any of this.
So this was a black neighborhood or a black high school?
Yeah, it's right there in Louisiana. And I said, if Black Lives Matter is really what they purport themselves to be, tell me why all of those people, all of those fathers who went down there to that high school to march, because they were talking about then, it got so much publicity, because I remember I did a GoFundMe for it. It got so much publicity that I said, wow, if there's anything that Black Lives Matter could show their face right now to show that, hey, this isn't just about, showing up every time that there's police brutality, we really do care, this would have been the time to do it. But there was dead silence.
Wow.
Well, it's like, Rob, I believe that one of the leaders was purchasing a few homes in Southern California during that time, so they, of course, couldn't make it down.
Yes. Well, Topanga Canyon is a real nice area, Mark. It really is.
I know, and the majority, like the majority of minorities there is increasing by the day.
Wow. Wow. Very, very interesting stuff, guys. I'll get one more topic that I want us to discuss before we close out, and it has to do with the allegation of systemic racism. Now, which I find, I don't know, I find it challenging. I mean, Rob, you're living in Georgia, and what I find fascinating is that Georgia, one of the states of the old Confederacy, right? In the senatorial election that's coming up, you have a black Democrat, Raphael Warnock, who's the sitting senator, by the way, running against Herschel Walker, a black Republican. And I find, I guess I scratch my head. I'm like, is America really systemically racist if you have two black men, one on each side of the political aisle, running for the Senate?
Right.
In a state that's the old Confederacy, Anyway, that just came to mind. Let me read some notes here for you before you comment. So again, I'm going to give you another passage of scripture. One of my favorites. It's Galatians 3:28, and the Apostle Paul says there's no Jew nor Gentile, no slave, neither slave or free, nor male, nor is there male or female, for all are one in Christ Jesus. So in the direct context, Paul is talking about in Christ, it doesn't matter where you come from, right? This is a big deal. Obviously, the Jews were the chosen people, but by the time you get to the New Testament, now the message of the gospel is God is intended for all people. And you follow Christ, doesn't matter black, white, whatever color you are, whatever ethnic group, you can be saved when you're following Christ. So that's the evangelical context of it. But I think that this actually informs us in a civic sense. And it basically says, all right, if all people are valuable in the sight of God from a salvation point of view, then to mistreat somebody in the public square because of their ethnicity, that's wrong as well. And that kind of Christian principle is ultimately what got this country to abolish slavery and to elevate the civil rights movement, because the value of that Christian value of loving all people by God was not being implemented across the society. So we have that as the Christian reality, the historical American reality. And yet today in America, Rob, we hear this constant refrain that, oh my gosh, the country is systemically racist. We have to teach the 1619 Project. We've never lived up to our values. It's 400 years of oppression and so forth. So can you tell our listeners, Rob, whether or not you believe that this country today is still systemically racist? And if so, how did you reach your conclusion?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I absolutely do not believe in that. And there's a couple problems with that. My background is in IT, so I'm very methodical when I'm going up against certain issues like this. So
Okay.
the first problem, let's just break that sentence down. The first problem I have with this statement is the fact that it says America is racist. Okay, so let's clear up the fact that America isn't a person.
Right.
It's a country. It's a country comprised of some 330 million people. So there's no universal consensus that all of us have on race relations. Some people are jerks and some people are not. Some people fought for slavery during the Civil War. Some people fought against slavery. So the first premise that America can be one thing is shot down, because there is no such thing as the country having feelings. The second part of this sentence, okay, let's talk about the fact that it's the claim that America is systemic. Okay, I'm glad that Marc started off, by looking up some definitions, because that's exactly what I did on this as well. Synonyms for the word systemic are complete, absolute, whole, thoroughly. So again, I say the claim is a lie, because if America were completely racist, absolutely racist, thoroughly racist, then not a single black billionaire could slip through. Because you can't be a billionaire in secret, I mean, somebody knows you, right? You think white people don't know Oprah's a billionaire? You think white people don't know Michael Jordan is a billionaire? Stop it. Of course they do.
Yeah.
They help contribute to him, for crying out loud. So one of the lessons that I learned early on from Thomas Sowell is that the left most of the policies of the left can't stand up to three questions. They're crushed by three questions. One, compared to what? Two, at what costs? And three, what are the hard facts? I didn't even have to go through all three to crush this argument. So I started with compared to what? Whenever I heard this systemic racist claim, the first question that crossed my mind was compared to what? So what I said was, I did this show on my channel where it says why Kevin Hart wants to be a billionaire. And so I decided to research how many black billionaires are there globally. Because again, compared to what? The left always talks about like America as though there's this other country out there that is like heaven, and America is hell. So I was like, okay, well, let's look up black billionaires globally. And you can watch the process that I went through on the channel, but to cut to the chase, I came up with 15 billionaires globally. Okay, 1 from Canada, 6 were from Africa, and 8 were from America.
Wow.
So let that sink in for a second, because America is producing more billionaires than Africa. So if our country is trying to hold a black man down systemically, mind you, then we're doing a horrible job of it, because we're producing 33% more billionaires than even Africa. So this is the kind of nonsense that people believe in because they don't do their own research.
Wow. Marc, I'm speechless. You have to pick up the ball.
I've got the ball. He's down the sideline. He's high stepping. I mean, and it's just, oh my gosh. Well, I got like a page of notes here. And Rob, I mean, you brought up a great point. I mean, Larry Elder had brought this up as well. Facts are to a liberal what kryptonite is to Superman. Their arguments never stand up underneath just not even intense questioning, just base questioning. And I mean, just taking even further, I believe a lot of it too. I hold the education platform or the education system in America responsible for a lot of this disinformation that has been permeating through a lot of the black culture. And you can describe it too, Rob. Was like when I sit back and I hear people railing about this, I sit back and go, okay, tell you what, I mean, it's like racist. The country's systematically racist or systemically racist. And I had a discussion with our pastor about that. It was terms of, if this is the case, then why are you standing up? Why are you preaching? I mean, if that's the case, like, shouldn't you be down on the plantation, shucking corn? It's like if we're all systemically racist, and to say that's if your argument looks at, let's see, celebrities, politicians, captains of industry, if we have to remove this monolithic mindset that gets this idea that, well, the white man's keeping me down. So Michael Jordan's not being kept down. Oprah's not being kept down. Jay-Z's not being kept down. Beyonce's not being kept down. Where is this idea that everybody's being kept down by the white man, yet all these people manage to break through? And if that's the case, then what's your excuse? It's that victim mindset that has just been generated and poisoning to me, blacks, is the idea that I can't succeed. Whitey's is like, Whitey's going to keep me down. No, your lack of motivation and innovation is keeping you down. Nobody is like, if people don't have time for that. People waking up trying to eat their cereal and their cornflakes and bounce and try to survive another day here. They're not concerned about you. You're concerned about you. It's like finding a convenient excuse to not grow, to not move, to not innovate. You'd rather just sit there, be miserable, roll dice, and drink your 40.
See, Rob, now you know why I have him on the show. I just did. Excuse me.
It's been a long time since I heard about a 40.
On the God and Government podcast, Mark, you're going to have to return. Anyway, I'm looking at the stats here online. So the continent of Africa in 2019, it says 1.3 billion people. So you said 6 billionaires out of a population of over 1 billion. And the United States, 8 black billionaires in a population of 330 million. Yeah, I think you're right. That kind of flies in the face of the allegation of systemic racism. And I would say this, I only agree with the idea of systemic racism when it comes down to particularly public education, because I do believe that there is a systemic problem with people, particularly Black Americans who are in urban centers, being stuck in failing schools for generation upon generation. There's some sort of systemic problem that does not permit them the freedom to get out and make their own choices on how to educate their children so that their children can do better.
Sorry, John.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
But here's the thing. I understand exactly where you're going, but here's the problem I have with, again, going back to synonyms. The problem I have with the word systemic.
Yeah.
Whole means entirety, complete, absolute.
Yeah.
And it's not that. It's coming all from one direction. Tell me conservatives haven't been fighting for voucher systems.
You're right. We have.
Exactly. So it's not whole. It's one party that's keeping this up.
Well, all right. I stand corrected.
Yeah. And even as like taking Rob's point and just what you were saying, John, is the fact that, it's this quiet patronizing that really just gets the back of my hair up. The fact of like, affirmative action. Well, we're going to bring these standards down to help you get into these Ivy League schools. Here's a crazy idea. Don't go to the Ivy League school. Go go local. Go to community college. Go to a local college. It's like it's last time I checked is when I did a job interview. One of the questions wasn't, let's see here, Mr. Richardson. I see you graduated from Wayne State University. Oh, that's a lower level tier school. I'm afraid we're not going to have to hire you. Nobody even cares about whether or not a degree or not.
You're true. You're right. Yeah, one of the things with this is the Rob. I really like how you break it down with this idea of systemic being total. It's a totalitarian mindset, So it's not surprising that the left would glom onto that idea, being that it's something that broad brushes everything. One of the things that I find most heartbreaking about that allegation is what it does. I think it communicates to children, in particular, it communicates to white children that you are guilty of something, and it communicates to Black children you are not worthy. You can never come up. And I think that is a terrible, terrible thing to do to children, terrible thing to do to people of any ethnicity. What do you think?
Absolutely. I had this conversation with someone that's fairly close to me, that's really close to me, actually. And they have a learning disability. And unfortunately, they have a learning disability, and so much of the family members were all around them, and they were all patronizing to the fact that this person has a learning disability. And so I told them one time, because their opinion was that I was being tough on them. They thought I didn't like them. And I said, no. I said, I know you don't get this. And I said, but I am your biggest advocate. And they didn't get it for a long time. And they finally approached me one day and they said, "What do you mean you're my biggest advocate?" And I said, with all due respect, I said, a lot of people who are around you, they watch you grow up with this ability. And so therefore they treat you with kid gloves and they say what you can't do. And I said, I didn't know you back then. I said, I just sit back and observe the things that you can do. And I said, and that's why you are uncomfortable with me, because I said, you've kind of gotten complacent in the fact that everyone around you says that you can't do certain things. So you kind of become lazy, but I don't see that side of you. I only see the things that you can accomplish. And so I'm always on you about the fact that you can do better. And I said, that's why I'm your biggest advocate, because you only see what you can't do, and I only see what you can, even with the limitations. And that, in a sense, is the same thing that I see with the Black community, is we're still talking about a time when we couldn't read. And I'm like, we're in an information age, for goodness sake. Don't talk to me about the times you couldn't read. Even if you couldn't read, we got videos. YouTube has got more videos than ABC, NBC, CNN combined.
Right.
So, I mean, there's no excuses.
You're absolutely right. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I'm glad that we could make this connection. We're running towards the end of our time. So can you tell our listeners, Rob, where people can find you, what your handles are and so forth?
Sure. On Twitter, I'm Rob the Speaker. So I used to be a national speaker, and I'm also the same thing on Facebook. Rob the Speaker, and on YouTube is the Rob Lett Show, or just Rob Lett, ROBLETT.
Fantastic. Well, I encourage all of our listeners to check him out. He's quite astute. Marc, you got any final comments?
Wow. Yeah, I do have one. And I'll make it quick because it's hysterical to me. So I was reading Variety, and Amy Schumer is hosting the 94th Academy Awards with Regina Hall and Wanda Sykes. And they interviewed her, and she was trying to get Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky via satellite or pre-taped segment on air.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sat there for a second and went, if you can't virtue signal epically, don't virtue signal at all. And I'm sitting here like, the only reason that they want him on is to pat themselves on the back and talk about how the millions of dollars the quote unquote entertainment or celebrity community has given towards Ukraine. Even though if you polled 100 celebrities, 95% of them couldn't tell you where Ukraine was on a map.
Yeah, you're right. Great stuff. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time. And we thank our listeners for checking us out. We're on anchor.fm/God and Government. You can also find this podcast on Spotify and Google Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time. And gentlemen, enjoy your day. God bless.
Everyone, take care. Rob, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate everything that you said and did for us.
Thank you, John and Marc, for having me.
You got it. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Hey, it's Rob. You already know that the days of you and I being able to freely interact like this are slowly coming to an end. You've got two choices. You can either be reactive to all of the censorship and try to determine where all the conservatives have gone, or you can go to roblett.com. I don't know about you, but I've never been one to sit back and wait on anyone to come and rescue me. Sure, there may be some social media company that gets invented that's better than the ones we have right now, but guess what? For thousands of years, adults have never had to rely on a platform in order for us to speak to each other. So we don't need that today. All I need is a direct line of communication to you. Go to roblett.com, and I'll see you on the other side.